Hi, everybody. Hello and welcome. I hope you guys are doing very, very well. This is the exact same time that I'm filming my Oncidium video, so forgive me, this channel is going to be a little orchideous for a while, definitely into my orchids lately. I've been having better success with them. But I just wanted to talk about mini Phalaenopsis. So this is a moth orchid, but it's a miniature one. And I got some really, really good tips from a channel here on YouTube that you might be familiar with. Miss Orchid Girl. Danny is a wonderful person that runs that channel that has really good tips on these. But I just wanted to show you a couple of things that I kind of learned about these. So don't let the name Mini Phalaenopsis fool you on the size of the plant. The actual leaves and the roots and the stems will get comparable in size to a regular Phalaenopsis. So you got to make sure that you have, space to accommodate for those. Because this is a new one, it's in its original ceramic pot. I'm going to be transferring this one into water culture. So when you're growing these guys in water culture, basically what you're doing is you're depriving them of water and keeping them dry for about 3 days and then letting them soak. Sorry, about 4 days. And then letting them soak for 3 days. Or, on the contrary, you can more frequently water them, soak them for 10 to 15 minutes, and then let them dry out completely until the roots are kind of a silvery, kind of gray, glaucous color. Isn't that a beautiful spike? So, in my Oncidium video, I was talking about how I wouldn't leave the spike on just so that the pseudobulbs have enough energy stored for future bloom shows. For these, this is a pretty juvenile orchid. It's probably in its first bloom cycle ever. So I would, oh, there's another spike. I just got to show you guys that. It's actually sending out another bloom spike. But for these ones, you can cut them about halfway back and then they'll rebloom. So over here, kind of near the middle of my forehead, that's a closed node. And then above it, we have an open node. You're going to want to cut below those open nodes because those open nodes are not going to rebloom for you. The closed node, you're going to want to cut about a centimeter above from that. Doesn't necessarily have to be a 45-degree angle or anything, just enough clearance above that bud that it doesn't necroticize around that area. And you should get a second bloom spike. So Phalaenopsis bloom in response to a subtle dip in temperature and shorter day length. It's a little debatable whether or not the day length is that important, but definitely a slight decline in nighttime temperatures will send these guys into bloom. So if you don't have blooms on your Phalaenopsis orchids, try that. Try keeping them closer to a window or like in a cooler room of your house at night, and they should surprise you with blooms. They naturally will bloom kind of all year, but in our houses in the indoor climate, they'll typically bloom in December and January. The bloom spikes can last up to a month, 5 weeks even. This one has pretty healthy roots, so I'm just going to show you. So you're going to want to look for the roots that are somewhat pliable, that are kind of green. I don't know if you can see this kind of jade green color. And you're going to want to make sure that they're not mushy. Some of the roots on the inside of the plant, like on the inside of the growing media, will be white or yellow. That's just because the chlorophyll hasn't fully come to the surface of the root because it hasn't been exposed to, light to photosynthesize correctly. The chloroplasts aren't agglomerating on the top of the root epidermal tissues. So basically, don't panic if your roots look pale or yellow. If they're not squishy, if they're firm, if they still have the protective coating, they should be fine. Orchids will not rebloom, at least the vast majority of different types of orchids will not rebloom from the same node. So we see here, it's sending out a spike in this crotch between what was a leaf and this leaf here. And then it's sending out another one here on the other side. They will not bloom from the top. The top is always vegetative growth. You're always going to get new leaves there. There's two different kinds of roots. There's aerial roots and there's basal roots, epiphytic roots, which anchor onto the tree. These are aerial roots, these big ones that are typically a little wider, that have a darker root cap. You can miss those if you want. I wouldn't recommend really keeping them all that drenched, just because you want to avoid getting water in the crown, because that's when you get, rot and crown rot, which is really hard to remedy. If you get crown rot on these, oh, I should probably take a thumbnail. But if you get crown rot on these, um, you can still save your plant. A lot of people think like it's the end of the day, but if you have even one aerial root and you have zero roots on the bottom, but you have at least two leaves with a junction and a little piece of stem, what you can do is you can hang them upside down like this and put them in a large solo cup or a large plastic cup. Fill that cup with water till it reaches the tips of the leaves, makes contact with the apex of the leaves. Keep the base of the plant around where my index finger is dry, and put a cover on top of it, and you should be able to regenerate your orchid's roots that way. Um, Sometimes they'll experience what's called bud blast. This one over here has bud blast right now, actually, where I don't know if you can see the very, very immature terminal bud there is turning kind of a rosy kind of um, coppery color. That's gonna fall off. That is totally normal. When you get a new orchid, they're stressed out. They don't want to move. It's what they do in the wild is they anchor onto trees, onto limbs and bark and mossy kind of structures on tree canopies, and they stay there. A big learning curve for people when they're starting with orchids that I think is a very important thing to teach people is the anatomy of the plant allows for water to flow down freely. Water doesn't pool. So we grow orchids upright like this, right? This here's kind of the modern convention of growing orchids inside. But when they're growing on trees, they actually grow more like this. They grow on an angle. And more accurately, the bloom spikes typically will go down. So you'll find your orchid growing like this. See how the water can just jet out from the crown and not pool? If you have your orchids growing on a mount or on a living wall, for example, that tends to be a little better. If your orchids get wrinkly, they're dehydrated. A lot of people will, myself included, I've killed orchids in the past. But you get better with practice, you know? Practice makes perfect. But if your orchids get wrinkly, that typically means that they're not absorbing enough water. They don't have enough root mass to really absorb that water. So, you know, it's typically because the bottom of the crown junction has rotted. So you might be giving them water and water and water, but they don't have the structures necessary to suck up that water. So you're going to want to look at your root zone. I'd recommend growing these in bark mixed with about a quarter of sphagnum moss. I'd recommend sphagnum moss over other kinds of moss just because of its water retentive qualities. Don't worry so much about the form of the cane. It will always arch in the direction of the light. So you can always rotate your plants, but this is pretty standard as far as like typical, you know, bloom spike formation goes. If your roots get papery and kind of deflated and cardboardy, that means that the root is dead. It dried out, unfortunately. I'd cut that out immediately. But yeah, orchids are wonderful. Most Phalaenopsis orchids or moth orchids are not fragrant, unfortunately. But you can keep them for a really long time. They can become wonderful heirlooms. They're just amazing, really. Yeah. So orchids are cosmopolitan, essentially, which means that the Orchidaceae family exists all over the globe, other than, you know, polar regions and intensely hot arid regions and Antarctica. Other than that, they're found pretty much on all latitudes. It's quite amazing. So there's an orchid for everybody, really. But yeah, I hope that this helped. If you guys have any questions, let me know, and comments and suggestions. Yeah. Stay blessed, you guys, and have a wonderful day. Just wanted to give y'all a little close up. Just these patterns are so beautiful. Hopefully that focuses. You get the point. Have a wonderful day, you guys. Stay blessed.